Europe, Belgium, Zeebrugge. Ferries from England and Germany sail in and out of this bustling North Sea port every day. March 6th, 1987, a chilly winter's day. The Herald of Free Enterprise, an 8,000-ton car and passenger ferry owned by the European shipping company Townsend Torreson, arrives from Dover. She's made the 4.5-hour journey across the English Channel safely thousands of times. The Herald is on a tight schedule. She must complete 4 crossings every day. And between each trip, her crew must offload passengers and vehicles, clean the ship, and then reload for the next trip, all in the space of 90 minutes. Today, the Herald is just barely staying on schedule. 4 p.m. Assistant bosun Mark Stanley finishes up cleaning the car deck, ready for the return trip to England. He's been on duty for more than 5 hours, but will get an hour-long break before the ship sails for home. While the Herald's crew works hard, her passengers savor the last hours ashore, enjoying the shops, restaurants and cheap alcohol of continental Europe. 4:30 p.m. Assistant bosun Mark Stanley completes his duties and heads to a crew cabin for his break. He won't be needed on the car deck again until just before the ship sails at 6 p.m. On the bridge, the Herald's captain, David Lurie, who has 10 years' experience commanding ships. He double-checks his route home across the channel. It'll be his second crossing of the day. By 5 p.m., cars and trucks are starting to roll onto the Herald's lower car deck through her giant bow doors. A cut-price ticket deal means the ship will be at capacity tonight, and the crew have just 1 hour to complete loading. Once the lower deck is full, the crew must load the upper car deck. But there's a problem. The loading ramp at Zeebrugge doesn't reach the upper car deck. To reduce the gap, the captain must lower the ship in the water. He does this by pumping seawater into her ballast tanks. After 30 minutes, the ship sits 1 meter lower in the water. Only now can loading of the upper deck begin. "5:45 p.m. 15 minutes to departure. The crew struggles to load the upper car deck in time. First Officer Leslie Sable is in charge of loading, and he's feeling the heat. Turnarounds are so tight that even a short hold-up here could throw out the Herald's schedule for subsequent crossings. Crew member Lee Cornelius is hard at work.
There's always a bit of a rush at the end. Cars turn up just before you're sailing and fill the ship up.
"5:57. The crew finally finishes loading, but they're too late. The Herald will not depart on schedule tonight. Lee Cornelius places the safety chain across the bow doors. First Officer Sable tells Captain Lurie that loading is complete.
Okay, loading complete. Copy that.
Then he heads for his position on the bridge.
Stations, all stations. Herald of Free Enterprise, about to leave the harbour, proceeding outwards.
The announcement Harbour Stations calls crew members to their posts for departure. Lee Cornelius leaves the car deck to report to his station. "6:05 p.m. Captain Lurie starts up the ship's 3 9,000 horsepower engines. They're 5 minutes late. But weather reports say the channel is calm with only a light wind. He might be able to make up the time on the crossing. The Herald steams out of Zeebrugge harbour. She's now heading out into the icy waters of the North Sea. 6:24 p.m. As the ship approaches the outer harbour, Captain Lurie accelerates up to 18 knots, the maximum speed permitted. There's a party atmosphere among the homeward-bound passengers. Then, out of the blue, the ship lurches violently, throwing Simon Osborne off balance.
Very suddenly there was a jolt, and the woman turned round and kind of stared at me and started screaming.
In the cafeteria, people think nothing of it. The ship stabilizes, and everything returns to normal. The passengers go back to having fun. But down below, on the ship's car deck, something is terribly wrong. Just over a kilometer outside Zeebrugge Harbour, something is desperately wrong on the Townsend Torreson ship, the Herald of Free Enterprise. The Herald starts to veer off course. Captain Lurie wrestles with the controls, but she's not responding. Then on E-deck, the lower car deck, a crew member alerts one of the assistant pursers. There's a big problem. Water. Vast amounts of it pour down the stairs from the upper car deck. The purser races up the stairs to C-deck, where there's a radio. He desperately tries to call the bridge, but there's no response. 6:28 p.m. Now, a massive jolt. This time the ship tilts a full 30 degrees to the left. Before Captain Lurie can issue a mayday call, the tilting ship throws him to the floor. The fall knocks him unconscious. As the ship tilts, English couple Michael and Maureen Bennett struggle to hold onto their table in the cafeteria.
The sensation you get is like somebody's pulling a rug from underneath you. You can't get any hold, you can't hold on to anything.
The 8,000-ton ship now starts to roll over. 19-year-old Simon Osborne loses his footing.
I was sliding down. It was as if literally the world had been turned upside down.
The only thing that was stopping me from going over, because the tables were strapped to the floor. If the tables had shifted, I would have gone.
As the Herald of Free Enterprise capsizes, there's a terrible grinding noise. Now the seawater breaks through the ship's portholes.
I was standing there, rooted, staring at this wall of white water coming towards me. And I thought then, you're going to die. The ship's sinking, and you're going to die.
Thousands of tons of water gush into the ship under huge pressure. Michael Bennett's wife Maureen can't swim. He's desperately trying to keep her head above water. But the rushing torrent makes it harder and harder for Michael to keep his grip.
I really, really panicked. I just panicked. I knew I was going to die.
The ferry's entire left side sinks into the North Sea, leaving only its right flank visible above the water. In a stroke of luck, the ship comes to rest on a sandbank. The sandbank stops it from sinking further, at least for now. At the edge of the harbour, the Belgian vessel Sanderus dredges the shipping channel. She's about 1 kilometre from the Herald. Her crew sees the bright lights of the Herald flicker and then go out. Inside the flooded Herald, more than 500 passengers and crew fight for survival. A dazed Michael Bennett struggles to keep his wife Maureen afloat in the freezing water. The Bennett's daughter, Teresa, finds herself alone in another part of the ship. Her leather coat fills with air and acts like a makeshift life jacket. But now, people struggling in the water below her try to grab her to stay afloat.
You could feel people holding onto your coat, holding onto your trousers, and literally trying to climb over you. One of the worst things is you've got someone holding onto you and then all of a sudden it's gone.
Passengers who managed to survive now face another deadly enemy, hypothermia.
You start to think, are you going to get out? Are we going to die?
The North Sea water is just a few degrees above freezing. At these temperatures, most people will lose consciousness in just 20 minutes.
Mayday relay. All-stand radio. Mayday message number 1.
Water inside the ship continues to rise rapidly.
There's no more than 18 inches of air. And I remember thinking if we go any deeper, then you know, that is it.
"6:40 p.m. 12 minutes since the Herald keeled over. The rescue tugboat Seahorse nears the 8,000-ton ship. The tugboat crew break windows to get to the panicking passengers trapped below. 6:43, 15 minutes since the capsize. The water levels finally stabilize. Teresa Bennett has no idea where her parents and boyfriend are. She shivers. The water is just 3 degrees Celsius. If Teresa isn't rescued in the next 5 minutes, she risks losing consciousness. Drowning would then be inevitable. Towards the stern of the ship, Teresa's parents also struggle against the cold. 35 minutes after the Herald capsizes, Coast Guard helicopters help pick up survivors. Rescue ships continue to arrive. Local divers turn up to offer help. It's extremely dangerous to dive inside an unstable ship, but they know they are the survivors' only chance. 9 p.m. It's 2.5 hours since the Herald capsized. Divers are still finding survivors, but dead bodies are starting to outnumber the living. On shore, 35 ambulances rush the wounded to nearby hospitals. Just hours earlier, Maureen and Michael Bennett were celebrating their 9th wedding anniversary. They now lie side by side in a hospital ward with serious injuries. Maureen is frantic with worry about her missing 20-year-old daughter, Teresa.
I still was worrying where the heaven Teresa was. I just couldn't get that out of my mind. Where was she? Where was she?
"2:45 a.m. More than 8 hours since the capsize. Now the tide starts to rise rapidly. It creates dangerous currents inside the ship. Rescuers must suspend diving until dawn and the ebb tide. Any hope of finding any more survivors disappears. Many friends and families separated during the capsize learned their loved ones did not survive. Others face an agonizing wait for news. It's been 8 hours since the capsize, and Maureen has no idea if her missing daughter Teresa has survived. She repeatedly asks hospital staff and reporters if there's any word. Then the hospital chaplain arrives with news.
I've good news. I've just heard that she's alive. She's well.
Mate, she's alive! She's alive! Teresa is.
Thank God.
News of the disaster flashes around the globe.
Drama at sea. A massive rescue effort is underway tonight off the coast of Belgium as hundreds of passengers aboard a capsized ferry boat are missing in frigid waters of the English Channel.
The scale of the disaster shocks the world. Early reports put the death toll at 150, making it the worst peacetime British maritime accident since the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. As dawn breaks, stories emerge of miraculous survival and heroic actions by passengers and crew. One man acts as a human bridge so that others can escape. A truck driver rescues a 5-year-old girl whose whole family are lost. The disaster is unimaginable. How could a modern 8,000-ton vessel sailing in perfect conditions capsize in only 90 seconds just over a kilometre out of port? As the Herald is a British vessel, the UK government's Department of Transport hires the investigators. What they see at the Herald's bow astounds them. The huge bow doors that allow vehicles on and off the ferry are wide open. It's clear to the investigators that water must have poured through these gaping doors. The media dubbed the open bow doors the doors of death.
It was such a difficult market to make a lot of money in, and of course one got commercial success by turning the vessels around very quickly.
Lee Cornelius's final duty on the car deck is to put a safety chain across the bow doors. First Officer Leslie Sable hurries to the bridge. They're now 5 minutes behind schedule. He is the last to leave the lower deck. Harbour Stations is also the signal to close the bow doors using a hydraulic control lever on the car deck. Investigators discover the responsibility for this crucial job falls to Assistant Boatswain Mark Stanley.
Stations, all stations.
But when they question Mark Stanley about his actions that night, they're in for a shock. When he should be on the car deck closing the bow doors, Mark Stanley is still asleep in his cabin. He took a nap after the ship docked in Zeebrugge, but slept through the call for harbour stations.
The Enterprise is about to leave the harbour. Proceed.
But the investigators are puzzled. Why does no other crew member notice that the bow doors are wide open and raise the alarm? They learn that who closes the doors and when is a hit-and-miss affair. The bow doors are left open because the assistant bosun is asleep, and on this night, no one else does the job for him. The investigators find that there is no fail-safe system for closing the bow doors. Although it's Mark Stanley's job to shut them, it should be double-checked by First Officer Leslie Sable. But in the race to stay on schedule, it was normal practice for the First Officer to leave the car deck before the doors were closed. The final death toll is 193, including 38 crew members. The investigators' final report finds that the Herald's loss is largely down to human error. Captain David Lurie is suspended for a year. First Officer Leslie Sable for 2 years. And the man who failed to close the bow doors, Assistant Bosun Mark Stanley, is found seriously negligent but escapes further punishment. The report finds that ultimately, poor management by the Herald's owner Townsend Torreson is to blame. The British Department of Transport hits the company with a £400,000 fine.